Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm here as always with my co-host John Micton. How are you doing, John?
Good, Dan. Nice to have you back. You were traveling, and we were just kind of talking about Hong
Yeah,
Kong, how you love that city. That is
I
your
do.
city, right?
My favorite city. Yeah, I was in Hong Kong for a week. We ran an event with Google. Um, yeah, it was really good. Met a lot of schools. Uh, we do some work with, I don't know if you know the English Schools Foundation. They run 23 international schools in Hong Kong, not non-profits, huge, kind of hangover from the colonial days, I
Uh-huh.
guess. But it was great. I met with them a few times. And we were just talking before we recorded. The thing I love about Hong Kong is how green it is. Like how we were staying in Central, and you could just like in Causeway Bay, really it's downtown Hong Kong, and you could just walk straight up the hill in like 15 minutes. You're in the forest, walking through a jungle. It's great.
That's beautiful. That's nice. And that's what's, I think, is special about Hong Kong is that the nature is actually much closer than you anticipate.
Yeah, people don't realize, and it's so small. You can get to really nice beaches in 15, 20 minutes max. Um,
Yeah.
everything's there. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess when did you first go there? I guess because you worked out in Asia
Oh,
like
in the
many years
the
ago.
first time I went there was in the 80s.
Oh wow.
Dating myself. Yeah. It's been a
That
while.
must have been
So
real
that's
boom time. That was still British, obviously, then.
We went in '89. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was, yeah, so it was still a British colony,
Yeah,
but
I went
getting
I
ready
went
for the change.
I went in 94 when it was still British. 97 was a handover. Yeah, so it was great. What about you, John? What have you been up to?
Just, been doing a lot of, work with, different, articles that I'm writing on AI and education resources, so that's been kind of good. Whenever you have to write an article, I'm doing it for the International Educator,
Yeah.
is it forces you to do a lot of research and kind of has me going to places maybe I wouldn't, and it's
Yeah,
been
yeah.
really amazing the amount of resources out there and how this new field. I mean, 6 months ago there was nothing on this, and
Yeah, I
suddenly
know.
people are generating. It's just incredible what people are generating, educator resources, ways to use it. That's specifically chat gpt and the large language model. So yeah, that's been really interesting. I'm learning a lot. And I was talking to a group of kids today, and they were just really wanting to know, how can you make sure these things don't go bad? And it was a really good question. He's like, is there a special switch you can turn off? And it's just nice to hear young kids, thinking about the ethics and some of the reflections that they're having as they see this technology surround themselves.
The main thing I hear from kids, this is kind of secondhand from, obviously we've got, friends who have kids at school and stuff, is like we're in a temporary golden era of cheating right now where
Yeah.
kids can get away with cheating. People haven't really caught up. It's easy. You can use chat GPT to write essays. You can change it enough to get through Turnitin and the plagiarism detectors and all the websites to check it. And that's not going to be around for a while. So I really like the kids now this year. It's great. They can cheat away and get away with it. I think it's the crackdown's coming, I think.
You think the days are numbered? Okay, so anybody that's listening that's a child, be careful. Your
Yeah,
days are numbered. Dan, the reason we're actually just blabbing here, which is
yeah.
always nice to catch up, is that it's our 100th episode.
It is.
We have done 100 episodes. That means we've talked to 100 different people, maybe more, because sometimes we had groups of people. So I think it would just be nice, Dan. Tell us, where did you start this? Why did this start? Because this
Yeah,
is
well,
really your creation.
it was an interesting. I'm just looking on the hosting site. The first episode was in June 2019, and I can't really remember what I was thinking, to be honest. I was like, and I like one thing I've got from you. We've been friends a long time, and you've told me a lot of things which have really helped me in career. But one thing you said is like, which has helped maintain your profile and got you work and done different things. It was like you publish things consistently. You publish content. You mentioned that you've got a Facebook group, which is the International School Tech Integrators and something group. It's got a very long title, and you
A
post that every
terrible
day.
title.
You post that every day, and you write articles, and I think that's one of the things that's influenced me is like making myself put out content regularly, and this was just one of the things I was doing. I don't think I ever thought it would continue, but yeah, I mean, because that is like definitely a mantra of yours, isn't it? Just to publish things and get content out.
Well, I think exactly. I mean, and I think I do it because when I put content out, it has me go and research, listen,
Yeah.
read, and it's a good exercise for me to keep posted. And I like to, and most of the content that I'm sharing is resources. It's very little, some people like, and I'm fine with self promotion, but a lot
Yeah.
of people like to self promote themselves, and I will say that I always hesitant when I do that, but I prefer sharing resources that people can take and say, "Wow, I can use that," or "Wow, that just got me thinking." So yeah, and I think what you've done, which is this idea of content, is the tech community that you manage. Your newsletters, they're just great, and you're doing them on a regular basis, and it really encompasses a lot of different topics. And I think that consistency, and with the consistency, a certain quality, I think people really appreciate.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting the point you made about self promotion. I mean, when people say that, this is going to sound a bit harsh, but I think it's often lazy people say that because they don't want to go to the effort of putting out content. Because what is self promotion? Like if I write an article, you and me make this podcast, and we talk to some really interesting people, and we're giving people free content about whatever, everything from digital citizenship to privacy to ed tech to a million different topics. Are we self promoting? I mean, I guess people are finding out about us, but it's not the reason we're doing it. And like, how can you put out content without being a self promoter? You could do it anonymously, I guess.
You could. I mean, and maybe that's the fact is as you're promoting or self-promoting, what is the focus? Is it you and what you're doing, or is it the content that you're sharing, or the ideas that you've engaged with in the case of the podcast, especially when you started?
Yeah,
Is so I think, it's social media self-promotion, full stop, right?
it is.
However
It
you
is.
look at it.
And it's interesting because this year, I mean, both you and I got the IC Research do something called Eduvator, and we both got given that. And
Eduruptor. You're
Edruptor,
Eduruptor, Dan.
Edruptor, and that's interesting because that's only because of the content I'm putting out, mainly this podcast, I think. And
Exactly.
that's it's just an award. It's very nice to have it, but there's a million people more deserving, obviously. But I think it's just you put out content and you get recognized in ways you don't imagine.
Yeah, and I think people do it's much easier with the algorithms and the impressions on your LinkedIn and your tweet. You can quickly analyze the reach of people and where their content goes, how many retweets and how many likes. And I think ICS Research, and they're a fantastic organization, and
Yeah,
I do
definitely.
applaud them for highlighting a lot of educators. But as you say, there are millions of good people out there that aren't getting recognized. But I think, that's a much easier way to acknowledge or amplify somebody than trying to read every article that they write. I think,
Definitely.
sometimes
Talking of IC
these
Research, we should.
algorithms make it easy.
Yeah, yeah. Talking of IC Research, we should get them on the podcast. Definitely. I noticed at ECIS, I missed the closing session. There's someone from IC was talking about trends in international schools. It would be great to get an up to date chat with them
Yeah.
about the
Yeah, yeah,
trends in
yeah, yeah.
international school growth.
That's a great idea. So Dan, you started this like,
Yeah.
you wanted to have some content, so you get your mic out and you kick off. What was the first podcast?
Well, it was you actually, John.
Really? Are you
Yeah, you were
serious?
the first guest. I was just like, I couldn't remember. I had to go back and look at it. So the first guest, the title is it was June 14th, 2019, and digital citizenship and working in international schools in Tanzania, China, Japan, Czech Republic, Switzerland, and Luxembourg.
Oh, it was
That's what we
kind of
talked
my
about.
little story about digital citizenship.
I know,
That's so
yeah,
funny.
definitely. And we
Yeah.
now at the time I had another podcast, like a general kind of business one, which I've now stopped doing. You give me some good advice on that, which my heart wasn't really in it, so I stopped doing that. But you were my first guest. Obviously, you were very kind to come on a podcast that didn't even exist at the time, and that my original idea was to like talk about like a topic like digital citizenship in this case, and then talk about the sort of travel stuff because I'm really interested in. It's one thing I like about international schools is people move around all these different places, and
Yeah.
you've really like, I just listed the countries you've lived all over the world. So I kind of my idea was to split each episode would be a bit of a topic and a bit of like, what's it like where you live, or and that not it's changed a bit, but quite a few episodes are still like that. So that was kind of my idea. And if you look at the first few episodes, that was kind of the general sort of format of travel plus topic.
And then also, oh yeah, because you had living in Peru, what some then also Taiwan.
Hong Kong, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
And
Oh, I forgot we had Ken Shelton about DEIJ. I forgot that. That was
yeah, I'm gonna get Ken on. I'm
the
gonna
8th
meet
of
Ken.
June.
I'm gonna meet Ken in Isti in end of this month. Actually, we're just planning a dinner in Philadelphia. I'm gonna be across in the US. But I was just looking. You were on episode 1, then you were on episode 5, then 13, 16, 17. So you were kind of like I kind of kept it ticking over. But you were like the most regular guest. If I look back, I don't even. It's amazing the things you forget. I don't remember that at all. You know, you were there.
Neither do
Um,
I, so that's funny.
yeah, so you were regular, and then sometime, and then you could mention, John, how you got involved, like what, because it was you contacted me, you were thinking of doing a pod. So do you want to explain how that went down from your point of view?
Yeah, so I had a few people say, "Oh, you should do a podcast," and I was like, "Oh God, not another podcast." And then I had been a guest a few times with you, and then I think we just start talking. We'd say, "Well, we could co-host. We could do something
Yeah.
together." You know, we've known each other for quite a few years, and we've done a lot of work together. And I think we're both very different, and I think that really brings a lot of. I love your skepticism, and sometimes people say something and then you're like, absolutely not. But I think that's important. I think that's really important. And Dan, I know one episode you're like, oh, I need to edit it all out. And we didn't. And it sounded really good. It was actually a nice counterbalance. And
Jane
think
ignored my request. Yeah, definitely.
I think we have to be careful in these times that are so polarizing. I think we need to be comfortable hearing different views and not always take it personal and be able to say, wow, I don't disagree. That was quite strong what they said, but I'm going to respect them for whatever they said, however much I disagree. But we're going to have this conversation because I think if we don't have this shared capacity, it just polarizes things. And I think that's something that you see a lot of.
John, you're talking crazy talk now. This is 2023. If you disagree with someone, you call them a fascist, you insult them, and then you rage quit whatever platform. You don't have a decent discussion. What? You're living in the pasture.
I know. And I know we've talked about this because a couple times you had posted in places and people were reacting I remember we talked and you're like, oh, I need to say something. And we were like, no, let's just let it go. And I think that's what you have to do, right? And I know
I do it again.
you've had a couple.
One of the other many things you've told me, which I've mentioned before on the pod, is like, just presume everything you ever write in an email is going to be published. Don't get into arguments online. Just don't. Just there's no point. Just either say something nice or just don't say anything. And I've definitely taken that to heart. It never helps you getting into arguments on the internet.
No, it doesn't. And you're going to lose, and then it becomes public, and then you have complete strangers jumping in and out, deciding they're going to weigh in on it. So, no, I'm with you on that, Dan. Yeah. And I think this is what's really challenging is, especially when you're publishing content, you have to be, I don't know how many hours I spend before I hit the publish sign. I double check, is this appropriate? I have to look at stuff because sometimes you might look at something and not read it through, and suddenly you realize, oh, that was not what I was thinking.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, so you got involved, and that's what saved the podcast, really. Not that it was dying; it was slowly going up. But you've brought a new enthusiasm to it. Yeah, and a lot of episodes. We do some. You do episodes yourself. I do them myself. There's no obligation for both of us to be there. And I think you're definitely the star of a show. I'm kind of a straight man at this point. I'm the hype man. If it in rap terms, I'm Flavor Flav and you're Chuck D. So I'm sort of.
You're dating yourself, Dan.
I
A lot
know,
of people
exactly.
have no idea who these wonderful artists are.
Brixton Academy in 1989. But yeah, so yeah.
So
I
the
think
thing is,
definitely.
which is kind of amazing, I think, Dan, is that we've talked to over 100 people.
Yeah, I know, it's great.
Which is just amazing. And What's interesting is you and I will throw a guest back and forth, and you'll bump into somebody. I mean, Denny, you've had a few times, and he's always really resonated about international schools for profit, and that was a whole topic that we dug deep into, which I think is
Yeah,
also a passion.
I think definitely because I'm obviously we've got different we've got a lot of crossover, but we've also got a lot of different interests. You're definitely much more interested in digital citizenship, privacy, all that kind of those related topics, which is really interesting. I'm obviously also interested in like the entrepreneurship and the business stuff. So we've had different guests, like people like from my side, we have Andrew Hallam, who wrote The Millionaire Expat, which is really
Yes,
interesting. Um, we've had multiple people talk about the business of international schools. Denry, obviously, we talked about how that kind of works. So a few of those, and I think that's interesting to some people, and then some people, obviously, you've got a lot of really good guests on the kind of digital citizenship related topics as well.
yeah, and what I think one thing that if you look through the episodes, it's been quite broad. We've had a lot of school leaders. We've had a lot of work, on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, which I think is really Lawrence Tidiane, was really interesting.
Yeah, that was a
We
great episode.
talked
Yeah,
about third culture kids, Ruth Van Raken, the
yeah,
author. It's been really interesting, and I think one thing also that I've enjoyed is that we've also talked to a lot of people that are entrepreneurs or teachers that
yeah,
were, for example, we talked to Tom Adamick and Stéphane Vermila, both educators that went into business for themselves, authors. So I think it's interesting to see how many educators have gone into the business world or entrepreneurship. I'm not hearing as many entrepreneurs becoming teachers.
yeah. Oh, I almost did, and if you remember, John, you actually
Yes,
advised me against it. I was thinking of looking for a tech director job, and this is a few years ago, and you were like, "Why do you want to do that? You can make your own schedule. You get because like your point was, I get to hang out with tech directors and hang out with schools. I don't need to go there every day. So,
exactly, exactly.
but
One
John, it's
thing that
interesting. Sorry, carry on, carry on.
no, go ahead,
No,
Dan.
no, please, you first.
No, I was just going to say one thing was also talking to people that have published books. I think is always interesting to kind of hear that process. It was Philippa, you remember? We
Yeah, Philip
talked in
Ravenel,
Dubai,
yeah.
yeah, and Dr. Helen Kelly, and so that's
Andrew
always
Hallam, the
been
millionaire expat. A few.
yes,
I just want to. It's interesting. I want to just a slight tangent. You mentioned about um, educated entrepreneurs. Teachers who've gone into do businesses and things. And it's interesting because I was thinking back. Like I've got quite a few friends, some mutual friends who've like different. There's different ways. Some people leave education. They start a business and they just keep doing that. But there's also a lot who end up just going back into education. Like I can probably count definitely on two hands of people I know who've started a business or done it and then kind of missed for school life as well.
oh, really? That's interesting. So what
Yeah.
they started a little startup, did it for a while, and then decided this is not for me?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a few. I'll put some names in the chat. I won't mention them publicly on. Uh,
Cool. No, that's interesting
yeah,
because,
yeah, yeah,
it's talking to our guests that have gone from education, a lot of them had to take a leap of faith. There's financial constraints, there's time, there's also just having the belief in your idea and
yeah.
jumping like that. Oh yes, okay, now I see what you're saying.
but
Yes.
it's interesting because even the two I mentioned, they're both still doing businesses. They've gone to work in schools and then they're actually working part time on their business. So like a lot. That's actually a really common thing in terms of the educated entrepreneurs. And often people they wouldn't come on the podcast and talk about it, unfortunately, because their school might, depending on how open minded their school is, the school might not look too kindly on it than doing other things. But there's definitely a
Oh,
lot of
that's a good point.
teachers doing this outside, which I think is fantastic. I think it's in today's uncertain world, you have to do things like that to keep your for some security for yourself. I think even though you got a job at a school, it doesn't mean it's always going to be there.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's a really important point you bring. You have to make yourselves, I think if you're doing a side project, it's forcing you to be creative and thinking in a different space. And that in itself, I think, is a positive. And that can also then transition back to the school. I
Yeah,
think schools should be really encouraging people to, be a full-time educator, but if they dabble into like a little startup or some teaching or something, I think there's a lot of value in allowing that happen. And your point is a good one. Nowadays you never know about jobs. I mean, it all seems fine and dandy, and then one day, bingo, you're out of work, and having
Yeah,
something in the background is not such a bad idea.
definitely. And I guess, I mean, I guess we're recording this in May 2023, and I mean, and who knows what's going to happen? I mean, we're in the post-COVID world. There hasn't been this huge recession everyone was predicted, but some people are saying, and I somewhat subscribe to this opinion, that we've just kicked the can down the road, and we might be heading for a huge recession coming up. Which is going to affect international schools. I don't know if that's true. I hope it isn't true, but I just tend to think with looking at the macroeconomic situation, all the money that's being printed, I just don't see how we can avoid a recession. But I could be
Yeah.
wrong, and I hope I am.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, that, and I think there is kind of talking to Dr. Helen Kelly about teacher burnout and leadership burnout. One thing also, there is this kind of something in the air, like everything's fine, but you're just like, yeah, I'm not sure it's that fine.
Yeah,
It's almost like this anticipation that it's almost too good to be true. That's kind of sometimes the feeling that I'm reflecting upon, and a few people I've talked to have said the same.
and strange things are happening. Like, for example, I was in Dubai 2 years ago, and all the schools there were discounting their fees. Something I've never seen anywhere in the world. They were all huge numbers of vacancies at the schools, all advertising on their websites. First term free and 20% discount, different things like that.
Really?
And then the war in Ukraine kicked off. Like a huge number of Russians and Ukrainians have gone there, and Dubai, like there's waiting lists for the school. This just changed in 1 year from being lots of spaces to oversubscribed in the schools. It's just crazy
That's
how these things
amazing.
can change so quickly.
Yeah, yeah. One thing was been interesting with all the guests, these 100 conversations, is that every time I talk to these people, and we were talking to Safa and Louise from Tactical Tech, it's amazing how you walk away and you're like, wow, that is something I didn't know, or something you get, or information. It's almost like free professional development
Yeah, it
behind a
is.
mic. We invite you into the room, and we just ask you questions, and
Yeah,
people are
yeah.
so generous and so kind. Every single guest has come up voluntarily. I don't think we ever have people say no. We do get spammed a lot. Recently, we've been getting spammed, these people that I've never heard of, that apparently have agents that are trying to push them onto podcasts.
Yeah, I mean,
And
it's
they
not,
use,
it's not, it's not spam. I mean, I guess it's like, it's marketing email. I don't mind it as long as 'cause people have got to sell. It's a business. They're an agent. They got
good
to
point.
represent people.
Good point.
But if they send a guest who's got no relevance to international schools, I'm like, you should at least do your research. Because some of them are really. Some of the guests, I think we've even had one or two guests on who we got
Yes,
through
we have.
this.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but most of them we just ignore because they're just irrelevant, people,
Yeah.
irrelevant to our
When
audience.
in the email it says word of mouth tells us, I'm like, okay, you have no idea who we are. You don't
Yeah,
know it's
yeah,
just some rinky-dink little podcast,
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's
exactly.
that's the other thing that's been nice, and Dan, you've been getting this too, is really appreciate the feedback from people. When you bump into people, and also people posting messages, and then and face-to-face situations. That's really nice. One thing that I would say, Dan, that a lot of guests afterwards, or when we do a podcast, they say, could you send me all the questions and the framework and the timing? And I'm like, no, we don't do that. We
Yeah,
basically get you in a room and we start talking.
yeah. I mean, if you want to check out, we recorded an episode number 77, which was the top 10 things if you're thinking about doing a podcast. And
That's right.
the first one was just keep it simple, because it's hard to keep a schedule. I mean, we said make a realistic schedule. We do this podcast every 2 weeks. We probably at a push could do it every week, but it would just be too much hassle. But keep it simple. Like we have, fortunately, I have Jane I work with who does all the editing, extras, the graphics, so we don't have to do that. We do very little editing. We just, you've to be honest, it's got much more structure since you got involved. When I got involved, there was zero structure. Now you at least share a doc with a guest, and they get some information there and stuff. But I think if you check out this episode 77, I think that we had some good content there. But I think keeping it simple is the main thing.
Yeah, and I think also I find when people don't have questions, like if you give them a list of questions, they literally go and practice and they're
Yeah,
going to kind of freeze into some dialogue or narrative that they're really, they're worried about what they're going to say. Well, when you have a conversation, things show up and pop up, and then suddenly you go in one direction and it becomes very rich. And I think that's what I really, and I appreciate and thank you to all our guests that are willing to kind of take a leap of faith, come into the room and say, what, there's no structure? No, we're just going to talk. And I think there's
yeah,
something nice about that. Yeah. And I would say trying to do, like we do these very rarely. We did the cybersecurity. We've done a couple with Wolfgang and some IT directors. And so, but to do this every week, that's yeah, and to keep an audience, that's not easy. And I think what's nice about the guests is you're just facilitating the conversation. You're making sure you're asking the questions, but they're generating the content and giving the ideas and kind of provoking people to think.
definitely. Yeah, and people come to listen to the guests for sure. I think that's the main. You get a good guest on, that's what people want to hear from. They don't want to hear from us necessarily.
Yeah. And I think also people, podcasts is something that people like to learn from. I think a lot
Yeah,
of people listen to podcasts because it's entertainment, but usually you want to walk away and have some reflection. That's why audiobooks, but a lot of the political podcasts or podcasts on education or technology, they're always are kind of provoking you into thinking differently or provoking you to think about a different perspective or a different angle.
definitely. Yeah, 100% agree. And we've had a few episodes very much on the educational side. We interviewed the authors of a book, The International School Teachers Guide, and with Denry, and that was a really useful episode about like concrete things. How do you position yourself to get a job in the international school? And I had a couple of people contacting me who said that was useful for them getting their first job, which was
Yeah,
great.
that was a great one. The other ones I always like is when you invite school leaders and they tell you how they feel they should run things.
Yeah,
And that's so interesting. We've had Andrew, we've had Arnie, we've had Chip, and
yeah,
all three veteran leaders, great leaders, but all have a very different approach. And it's
yeah.
so interesting how this leadership approach can be so different from person to person, all with kind of a very heart centered approach, but just it was just interesting to see those different perspectives and different approaches.
Definitely, definitely. It was really interesting. And yeah, so I mean, we're up to 100. It's been great. Thanks to everyone for listening as well. Like it's
Yeah,
like we did. I mean, so in terms of like, we don't have any financial gain out of this. I don't even promote apps events on it. We did have a sponsor for a while, which was great. Faria, friends of ours, great products, Managed Back, Schools Buddy, Open Apply. They sponsored us for a while, and then there was some changes in terms of what their marketing budget was, and that was nice. But really, that was a very brief period of making money. Apart from that, it's just been very much a labor of love.
yeah, absolutely. And it's so nice. And oh, so I mean, we usually don't know how many listeners we have or who's listening,
Yeah,
but Jane, and Jane in the background does phenomenal work. She gave us some of the statistics, and I was just like, wow, that's a lot of people. I was
yeah, and
really
you get some
surprised.
random ones like the one you did with Dolene about DEIJ.
Jolene, yes.
Yeah, that had like 12,000 listens. Just some of them just spike, and you just don't know which one is going to do.
Exactly. I mean, it's hard to predict or what they are or not. Yeah, that's so true. Well, Dan, let's go for another 100.
Yeah, definitely, John. It's always a pleasure to do this. You always teach me lots of words I don't know, like provocations and creative tension. That's two I've had to look up what you say quite often. And every 2 or 3 episodes, I learn a new word from you, which is great.
Well, Dan, too, I must, I mean, compliments to you. You have such a generous mindset, and you're so open and helpful, and you always are very kind. And I know with apps events and the work that you do, it's always amazing. I've seen you work. I was in London and you invited, a whole bunch of IT directors. You're very caring and really are open to making sure people have those connections and that capacity to learn. So hats off to you. I
Well,
think you're a leader with a lot of heart, and I
thanks.
know a lot of people appreciate that.
Great. Well, thanks, John, and obviously thanks for being a co-host. I mean, yeah, please, if you enjoyed the episode, drop us a message. Let's see if we can get to 200. That's going to be another 2 years, so fingers crossed. We'll see if we can make it.
Yeah, absolutely. And do rate us if you don't mind. That's always
Yeah.
helpful to get rated. If you have the time, I know it's busy, just give us a little star somewhere and a word if it's appropriate. Thank you.
Cheers, John. Take care.
Yeah, see you, Dan.